In 1990, a real NYPD detective walked onto the set of Goodfellas, sat down in the Bamboo Lounge, and played a gangster named Fat Andy. Joe Pesci introduced him to Scorsese. Nobody on that set knew the same detective was already on the Lucchese payroll. $4,000 a month to leak informant names, tip off raids, and, when the price was right, kill. 2 months after the movie premiered, he and his partner pulled over a Gambino capo on the Belt Parkway and shot him 9 times. He had just played a fake gangster in a movie about real ones. That detective grew up in this world. To understand how a New York Police Department cop ends up on the payroll, you have to start with his family. Brooklyn, July 22nd, 1948. His dad, Ralph, was a Gambino associate they called Fat the Gangster. Bookie, enforcer, the works. His uncle James was a maid captain in the Gambino family. So this is not a guy who grew up near the mob. This is a guy who grew up inside it. October 1st, 1979, that world shows up at his door. His uncle and cousin are sitting in a car in Coney Island when Roy DeMeo and Nino Gaggi walk up and shoot them both dead. Paul Castellano signed off on it. And one of the cops who responds to the scene, Louis Eppolito, he is standing there looking at his own family in a car. A few years later, he is working for the people who did it. Most guys walk away from a moment like that forever. Eppolito went into business with them. He had joined the NYPD in 1969, made detective in 1977. His partner, Stephen Caracappa, joined the force the same year and ended up somewhere worse. These two could not have looked more different. Eppolito was loud, barrel-chested, the kind of guy who loved a camera. Caracappa was the opposite. Quiet, skinny, the kind of guy nobody noticed in a room. The squad called him the Stick. Barely drank, polite to a fault, went home every night to his daughter on Staten Island. The model cop on paper. By the late 70s, he had landed a desk in the organized crime homicide unit. His job, and you have to actually hear this one, was to investigate mob murders. For the next 10 years, he investigated the same killings he was helping commit. He had access to informant identities, raid schedules, surveillance files, and he sold all of it. A Lucchese associate named Burton Kaplan introduced the two cops to Anthony Casso around 1985 or 1986. Casso was a rising capo who would eventually be linked to 36 murders, and he called these two his crystal ball. $4,000 a month for intelligence reports, FBI informant names, a heads up before raids. Anything extra, like having someone killed, was a separate invoice. And Casso was about to need something extra. Goodfellas shows you wise guys running scams. At JFK, the Lufthansa heist. Henry Hill flushing cocaine while the feds knock. The reality. In 1986, New York was uglier than any of that. 2 decorated NYPD detectives were pulling targets over on public highways and shooting them in through the driver's window, grabbing people and hand-delivering them to a Lucchese underboss for torture, running police database queries to pull addresses for hit teams. Goodfellas didn't even come close. Casso is sitting in his car outside a restaurant on September 14th, 1986, eating an ice cream cone. A hit team rolls up and opens fire. He takes rounds, somehow drags himself into the restaurant, locks himself in the freezer, and lives. And now he wants the names of every guy who tried to kill him. Jimmy Heidel was one of the shooters. The cops got to him first. They went to his mother Betty's house on Staten Island, knocked on the door, and asked where James was. They found him, cuffed him, put him in the trunk of their car, and drove him straight to Gaspipe Casso. 2 NYPD detectives delivered a kid to a mob boss in the trunk of their squad car. That is a sentence that should not exist, and yet there it is. What happened next went on for hours. Casso used Heidel as target practice, working through his arms and legs until Heidel was begging him to finish it. about 14 rounds before the kill shot, and the body was never found. Casso paid the cops $35,000 for the delivery. $35,000 and a body nobody would ever recover. This was not two cops leaking paperwork on the side. This was a full-service delivery business with badges. 6 years go by. Betty Heidel is at home one afternoon watching the Sally Jesse Raphael show, and Louis Eppolito comes on TV doing his honest cop bit. She recognizes him on sight as the detective who knocked on her door the day her son disappeared. She calls the authorities, and nothing happens. But Betty Heidel does not shut up. When the case finally cracked open in 2005, her identification of Eppolito was one of the threads holding the whole prosecution together. She was right about the guy at her door for 19 years. She just had to wait that long for anybody to listen. While Casso was torturing Heidel, he got the names of the other shooters out of him. One of them was Nicholas Guido, so Casso did what any modern boss would do. He had his cops run the name through the system. They came back with an address, wrong Nicholas Guido. Shooters roll up to a house in Park Slope on Christmas Day, 1986. A 26-year-old kid is out in the street showing his Uncle Tony his new red Nissan. They shoot him dead at the wheel in front of his family. His mother, Pauline, is inside doing the Christmas dinner dishes when the gunfire goes off. She runs out and finds her son slumped in the driver's seat, already gone. This Nicholas Guido was a telephone installer. He had nothing to do with the mob. The real target was a Gambino associate with the same name across town. The cops had access to the most powerful law enforcement databases on the planet, and they sent a hit squad to the wrong house because nobody bothered to check a date of birth. A kid died on Christmas because the people paid to get it right could not be bothered. The corruption you have heard before, but the casual carelessness about a stranger's life is what does not go down easy. 29 years later, New York City wrote the Guido family a check for $5 million. The cops who had run that name through the system were already on to the next one. Rewind a few months. A jeweler named Israel Greenwald walks out of his house in Far Rockaway in February 1986 and disappears. An Orthodox man, 34 years old, wrapped up in a stolen treasury bill scheme connected to Burton Kaplan. When the feds got close, Kaplan paid about $30,000 to make Greenwald go away. The cops pulled him over in a fake traffic stop, told him he was needed for a lineup, and drove him to a garage on Nostrand Avenue owned by a man named Pete Franzone. Franzone testified later that he saw Frank Santora Jr., Eppolito's cousin, and a thin man he would later identify as Caracappa, walk in with a Jewish man wearing a yarmulke. Eppolito stayed in the car, keeping watch. 20 minutes later, only Santora and Caracappa walked back out. Greenwald had been shot twice in the head, and then they told Franzone to help bury the body in his own garage or to join him in the hole. So that is when this stops being only a mob story. Now it is a regular Brooklyn garage owner who has to bury a stranger because two detectives told him no was on the menu. These cops were not compromised by accident. They were running the same business their badges were sworn to break, and ordinary people kept getting fed into it. The FBI finally dug up Greenwald's remains from under the concrete floor of that garage in April 2005, 19 years after he vanished. Pieces of his yarmulke were still next to his skull. His wife Leah had spent 2 decades not knowing what happened. His daughters Michal and Yael were 10 and 9 when he disappeared, and they were grown women by the time anyone produced a body. And the man who had ordered the killing, Burton Kaplan, was about to walk into a federal courtroom and become the government's star witness. The system that buried Greenwald was about to use the man who buried him to bury everybody else. You've made it this far. hit subscribe. New episodes every week, pulled from trial transcripts and case files the movies skip. The killings didn't stop with Greenwald. The next one happened the same year Eppolito was on the Goodfellas set, pretending to be a gangster. Eddie Lino, a 47-year-old Gambino capo, is driving his Mercedes along the Belt Parkway near Brighton Beach on November 6th, 1990, 2 months after Goodfellas hit theaters. A red flashing light comes up behind him, the kind unmarked New York Police Department cars use, so he pulls over. What else are you going to do when the cops light you up? Caracapo walks up to the driver's side window and puts 9 rounds through it. Casso paid $65,000 for that one. Caracapo was the trigger because, as Eppolito told Kaplan later, Steve was the better shot. They left Lino dead on the shoulder of a Brooklyn highway and went home. Same year, Goodfellas was in theaters with Eppolito's cameo in it. Scorsese was making a movie about mob hits while one of his actors was committing them between takes. And Lino wasn't even the only one that year. A Lucchese soldier named Bruno Facciola gets lured into a garage in Brooklyn that August. Casso thinks Facciola is an informant, and that suspicion came straight from the cops, who had leaked confidential law enforcement paperwork fingering him as a rat. 3 men kill him in the garage. Frank Lastarino stabs him, Richard Pagliarulo shoots him, and Louis Didone stuffs a dead canary in his mouth, the old-school mafia signature for songbirds. Except, and this is the part that gets you, Facciola wasn't actually an informant. A guy got a dead bird shoved in his mouth for something he hadn't done because 2 detectives needed to look like they were earning their $4,000 a month. In Goodfellas, the violence is stylized. Tommy DeVito on Spider, Billy Bats in the trunk. There's a cinematic rhythm to all of it. Real violence doesn't have a rhythm, it's just procedural. People walked into garages and didn't walk back out, and bodies got buried under concrete or driven to the dump. Nobody outside the room ever heard a thing worth calling in. And while all this is happening, Eppolito is about to write a book about what an honest cop he is. He retired from the NYPD around 1989, right before he filmed his cameo. Caracappa took a disability pension in 1992. That same year, Eppolito published his memoir. The title was Mafia Cop, and the subtitle on the cover was The Story of an Honest Cop whose family was the mob. The book paints him as the guy who picked the badge over the blood, the guy who survived 8 shootouts, the guy who was falsely accused of selling secrets to the mob and was vindicated. By the time it is on shelves, he has already carried out multiple contract killings. The man wrote a memoir about his integrity while the bodies were still warm. Both of them moved to Vegas in the mid-90s. Eppolito kept the Hollywood thing on life support with a few more roles, then ended up selling cars at an Infiniti dealership. Caracappa took a quiet job in corrections, so a decorated NYPD detective who had committed 8 murders was now guarding inmates for a living. For 10 years in Vegas, nothing happened. No knock at the door, no calls from federal numbers. They thought it was over. It wasn't. About a dozen DEA and FBI agents converged on the pair on March 9th, 2005, as they were walking up to the maitre d' stand at a steakhouse called Piero's. The agents threw both of them against the wall and cuffed them. Eppolito had a loaded, chambered .45 tucked into his waistband at dinner. They were charged with 8 murders, 2 attempted murders, racketeering, obstruction, money laundering, and drug distribution. It was one of the worst corruption cases in NYPD history. It took 20 years to get to the cuffs. The trial ran 3 weeks in the Eastern District of New York. Burton Kaplan was the star witness. He was 71 years old, serving 27 years for marijuana, and he wanted to see his grandchild before he died. He sat on the stand for 3 days and told them everything. 40 years as an associate, every payment, every meeting, every body, all read out like a grocery list. It was devastating. The prosecutor running the case worked out of the same office that had failed to stop these cops while they were active. The system that let them run for a decade finally caught up to itself. The verdict came down on April 6th, 2006. Both were convicted on every count. Then Judge Jack Weinstein, in a 77-page ruling, threw out the racketeering conviction on a technicality. The 5-year statute of limitations had run on the key charge. The families were stunned after all of it. 8 murders and a jury verdict, and a judge was about to walk these guys on a calendar. The Second Circuit said no. A 3-judge panel reinstated the convictions and ruled the conspiracy had run well past the statutory window. Both were resentenced in March 2009. Eppolito received life plus 100 years and a $4 million fine. Careless received life plus 80 years and the same fine. Neither one ever saw the outside again. Careless filed for compassionate release after a cancer diagnosis and was denied. He died in a federal prison hospital in North Carolina in April 2017 at 74. Eppolito died in custody in Tucson in November 2019 at 71. The system that let them kill for 10 years would not let them out at the end. Not exactly justice, but about as close as this story was getting. Burton Kaplan got his sentence cut, was released, and saw his grandchild. The man who arranged half the murders in this story got the happy ending. New York City paid out millions to the families, $5 million to the innocent Nicholas Guido family, and another $5 million to the Greenwald family. The city paid because these were city employees using city resources to commit murder. Police computers pulled the addresses, squad cars carried the victims, badges opened doors that should have stayed closed. Every tool the city gave them to protect people, they used to kill people. In Goodfellas, Henry Hill goes into witness protection and lives out his days complaining about egg noodles and ketchup. The Mafia Cops ending is not that clean. The people running witness protection were the same ones feeding informant names to hit squads, and nobody noticed until the bodies started coming up. Fat Andy is on screen for about 3 seconds. Henry walks through the bamboo lounge, greeting the crew, and there's the guy sitting at a table, an actor playing a fake gangster in a movie about real ones. He had already killed for the family. And Scorsese, who had spent his career making mob movies, had no idea he had just put an active mob contractor in his cast. That's the version Goodfellas did not tell, not because Scorsese hid anything, but because nobody knew yet. The trial did not happen until 2006, and the full picture did not come out until a 71-year-old drug dealer decided he wanted to meet his grandchild. I think Goodfellas got the seduction of the life right. What it could not show, because the receipts did not exist yet, is that one of the guys sitting in the bamboo lounge was already deeper in the life than any of the fictional characters around him. Goodfellas is still a masterpiece. It just happens to feature a 3-second cameo from one of the most corrupt cops in NYPD history, playing a gangster on screen while moonlighting as one in real life. One of the men in Goodfellas was an active mob hitman. While filming, hit subscribe for more of the parts the films skip.